Today is the first day of our autumn 7-day session. It's the 15th of May 2016. And we're going to continue in this session drawing on stories from a collection called The Hidden Lamp, Stories from 25 Centuries of Awakened Women by Florence Kaplow and Susan Moon, edited by them. And this is a collection of really sort of long lost stories, all the stories about women masters which didn't get into the canon, so to speak, and it covers, as it says, 25 centuries, so from the time of the Buddha to the present. And the story that we're taking up today is called Shotaku's Paper Sword. And here's the story. Shotaku was the third abbess of the Tōkei-ji convent. One evening she was returning to Tōkei-ji from a nearby monastery when a man armed with a sword accosted her and threatened to rape her. She took out a piece of paper, thrust it like a sword into the man's eyes. He was completely overcome by her spiritual strength and was unable to strike her. He turned to run and she gave him a Zen shout, hitting him and knocking him down with her sword. In other words, her rolled up piece of paper. He fled. And just a little bit before we go into our story, a little bit about Shotaku and about Tōkei-ji, the monastery where she was the abbess. First about the monastery. Tōkei-ji was a Rinzai, or still is, a Rinzai complex of temples in Kamakura in Japan, and for many centuries it was a convent. It no longer is. But for a long time it was a major, large place for women to practice, and a sister temple to Engakuji, which was just across a valley from Tōkei-ji. It was founded by the Bhikkhuni Kakuzan Shido in 1285, so about 35 years after the death of Dogen. And Tōkei-ji became a refuge for women. In Japanese law, women were not allowed to divorce their husbands, though men could divorce their wives. And so women in abusive relationships had very few options. But Tōkei-ji became one. It became a practice that if you could get yourself into Tōkei-ji and spend 3 years there as a nun, then you were able to have a kind of legal divorce and to emerge to take up your life afresh. And for about 600 years, except for certain very special ceremonies, there was a whole inner part of Tōkei-ji into which men were not allowed to enter, which created this sanctuary for women who needed protection from violent husbands. and others. The abbesses of this temple were often highborn, daughters of aristocrats, or even on occasion the emperor. And no doubt this association, the family associations of these women, would have helped to protect Tōkei-ji, which is also known as kakekomi dera, which means the run into convent. And probably on many occasions women would actually have run into the protective cloisters of Tōkei-ji. Tōkei-ji is also famous for developing a unique form of Zen practice, which is known as mirror Zen. And in this practice, a woman would sit in zazen in front of a large mirror, and she would question. She would look at this image, look at it intently, and ask, where is a single feeling, a single thought in the mirror image into which I gaze? Where is a single feeling, a single thought in the mirror image into which I gaze? And various commentators have suggested that this mirror gazing practice was particularly suited to women who were living in a society in which they would be judged by their appearance, and so would be very attached to how they looked, whether negatively or positively, so attached to their beauty, or perhaps feeling a lot of loathing if they were not coming up to how beautiful they would like to be. And of course, in that time, beauty would have seemed to be a large determiner of one's fate. What kind of marriage one would make, family alliances. And of course, still today, women are very, very often judged on physical appearance. And there's enormous pressure in our culture now in terms of the sexualization of girls, where they're exposed to images which sort of tacitly teach them that how you look is the most important thing. So imagine an antidote to that. To look at one's image in a mirror. And really, what is this practice about? It's about learning to see that what you're looking at is in fact an image. It hasn't got the depth that reality has. Actually, we can't directly see ourselves. It's impossible. There's a saying in Zen, the eye cannot see itself. in the story of the sixth ancestor, Huineng, image of a mirror is a very important element in the story. Huineng was from the south and a layman when he came to his teacher's temple, and many of you know the story of the fifth ancestor sort of setting up a competition, inviting his monks to write a verse to express their understanding of the truth. And the head monk writes a verse, and then Huineng responds. When he hears, as an illiterate person, he has to get somebody to read it to him, but then he responds with another verse. The original verse of the head monk is, "The body is the Bodhi tree, the mind is like a mirror bright. Take heed and keep it always clean, and don't let the dust alight." And when Huineng heard this, he wrote another verse, "There is no Bodhi tree, nor stand of mirror bright. From the first there is not a single thing, so where can dust alight?" Kakuzan, the founder of Tōkei-ji, added her own verse to these two. She wrote, "Since not a thing takes lodging in the mind, it is untainted. To speak of polishing is itself illusion. Since not a thing takes lodging in the mind, it is untainted. To speak of polishing is itself illusion." If we look closely, we can begin to see how nothing lodges in the mind. If we examine it closely, it changes from moment to moment. In the Diamond Sutra it says, past mind is ungraspable, future mind is ungraspable, present mind is ungraspable. We're called on in our practice to see beyond appearances. The women who came into this temple, no doubt many of them had very painful pasts, which they may have seen as pretty hopeless and certainly oppressive. They may have taken on the judgments of the wider society, which would label them as fallen women or damaged goods. And really, given the narrowness of options for women, to fail as a wife would be seen as pretty close to failing as a human being. And so it would be an urgent thing for these women to find a way to get beyond the self-images, their own internalization of the ones from society and perhaps imposed on them by their families and upbringing. And this mirror practice could help them to see what remains undefiled, untainted, as Kakuzan says. to see that the notion that we have to polish our mind is in itself an illusion. It's not a matter of getting rid of the dust. Rather, we can, if we're attentive, see through the dust. Recognize what gets in the way as insubstantial. We don't have much information about Shotaku, this third abbess who features in our story. Her lay name was Sawa, and it said that she trained her ki as a child from a very early age, and this ki is this Japanese pronunciation of the chi that appears in Qigong and Tai Chi. One's energy or life force. It says in the accounts that she trained her chi through breath and body practices, and was an adept at gathering her energy in the tanden, in this vital center of the body below the navel. So whether probably she practiced some kind of martial art, and she, as a daughter of a samurai family, maybe this was something that was open to her. She married a retainer of the Hojo family, so somebody, a samurai of high status, but he was killed, and many were killed with him, because it was a time, this was in 1331, it was a time of war and great unrest and danger. And on her husband's death, Sawa shaved her head and entered Tōkei-ji, and she stayed. Her Dharma name was Shotaku, and for many years she practiced under Master Dasen, who was the abbot of neighbouring monastery in Kakuji. Now, just returning to our story. One night, when she was returning to Tōkei-ji, most likely this was her returning from Doksan with her teacher. To get from Inkakuji to Tōkei-ji, it was necessary to go down a steep hill, across a small ravine, and up the other side. And so we can imagine her making this walk very late one night. A dark, perhaps moonless night. And in her sleeve, she's carrying a scroll, a rolled up piece of paper with a verse written on it from her teacher, which is going to become her meditation topic. And as she's down in this valley, suddenly a man steps out of the shadows and accosts her, threatening her with a sword, and basically telling her to get down so he can take his pleasure with her. And she, at this affront, she brandishes this rolled up piece of paper. She pulls it out of his sleeve, whacks him on the nose. And he's completely flabbergasted. Here he is with a sword of steel in his hand, and she meets him with a piece of paper. Then she lets out a great shout, "Ha!" And he's thrown completely off balance and flees, leaving his sword on the ground. In this collection, each of the stories that is presented has a little reflection by a contemporary Buddhist teacher, and the teacher who gives the reflection on this one is called Nancy Mujo Baker, and she tells a story here of another example of courage, fearlessness. She writes, "This story reminds me of a news item that came out of Somalia last year about a remarkable woman doctor, Dr. Hawa Abdi, who runs a small hospital that she built on her own land. It's the only hospital for miles around. One day she heard gunshots. A group of warlords had surrounded the hospital with guns drawn. They belong to one of Somalia's most fearsome militant groups, notorious for chopping off hands and stoning adulterers. Why are you running this hospital, they demanded. You're old and you're a woman." She was held at gunpoint while the hospital was ransacked and severely damaged by the warlords' underlings. She was then put under house arrest for 5 days while the hospital was shut down. In that time, 24 malnourished children from the hospital died. But then something extraordinary happened. Hundreds of women from the sprawling refugee camp on Dr. Abdi's property dared to protest, adding to a flood of condemnation from Somalis abroad that forced the gunmen to back down. Because of so much publicity about their misdeeds, they agreed to open the hospital again. But Dr. Abdi refused until the warlords apologized in writing. They did, in both English and Somali. In their document, they apologized to Dr. Abdi, to the NGOs helping in the camp, to the camp staff, and to the Somali people around the area who had lost loved ones. And this Nancy Mujo Baker said this is a beautiful example of spiritual strength. In our story from the 1300s, Shotaku's chi, her energy, just comes forth. We can think that this is something special, but it really isn't. Each of us has this power. If we can touch it, then it will come forth when needed. The second story of Dr. Abdi really brings this kind of strength down to earth. I guess it also I always ask myself when I read stories of this kind of courage, would I have the courage to do this if I were in that situation? And I think the most honest answer to that is, I just don't know. Because this isn't something you can really predict. All we can really do is train ourselves to be as present as possible, because that's where this kind of response comes from. The Shotaku's parrying with her paper sword comes from a place that is prior to our thinking, deeper than thinking. Often when people do heroic things like rescuing somebody from a river or getting somebody out of a burning vehicle, afterwards they get asked, well, were you frightened? And often they'll say, I didn't have time to be frightened. They just responded. That thinking mind that might have made them fearful didn't engage. Something else engaged first. Nancy Baker adds, we all have this strength. It's the same strength we use whenever we commit ourselves to something completely. An example would be skiing downhill with one's whole body and mind, 100%. It is, on many ski slopes, the only way to avoid breaking a leg. If I ever have to have brain surgery, I hope that my surgeon could be 100% in this way. It is hard for us to do anything 100%, especially when it involves others. We are usually worried about making a mistake. Do we look right? Will we be approved of? Will we offend someone? And in this koan and the story from Somalia, we might also be worried about whether we would be killed. We are completely tied to others for reference points to assure us that we are solid, separate and permanent. We resist doing anything 100% because it involves giving up those reference points and thus ourself, something we are very reluctant to do. Actually, it's not even giving up ourself, it's giving up our self-image. The idea we have in our minds about who we are. There's a piece of research comes out of the US about what people are most afraid of, and the second thing on the list that people say they're afraid of is death. The first one on the list is speaking in public. Sooner or later, in practice, if we're putting energy into it, we're going to come up against fear at some point. Going to Doksan is a great generator of fear and anxiety. The prospect of going to Doksan, usually, not so much the actual going. But it's another thing, like speaking in public, where we dread making a fool of ourselves, saying the wrong thing, appearing perhaps less enlightened than we'd like to look. Or it can be fear of rejection, fear of being laughed at or disapproved of. Probably the ground fear which these two, speaking in public and dying, both share, is the fear of stepping into what we don't know, into the void, stepping beyond the safety of the familiar, even if that familiar is uncomfortable, or a place where we suffer, which we often do when we have very strong negative self-image. But at least it's familiar. It's the known. And so we cling to that image. At the end of each of these stories and the reflection, the editors add some questions. And the ones that they have here are, a Zen teacher once said that even if you weren't a bodhisattva yet, you could pretend to be one. What is the significance of imagination on the spiritual path? Can you overcome fear by pretending to be brave? These are good questions to ask. I actually don't think that Shotaku was pretending. It was something very authentic in her response. She was just coming forth with her energy. But she certainly wasn't anticipating what you would think would be the outcome from being threatened by a man with a sword on a dark, lonely path. And because she didn't have any idea in her mind about how things would turn out, they turned out quite differently from what you would expect. But going back to that question, can you pretend to be a bodhisattva? Then the answer is yes. Do our best to pretend. And if we keep pretending, then through force of repetition, we'll bit by bit become more bodhisattva-like. One psychologist says, if you can't make it, fake it. This is, we could distinguish between courage and fearlessness. That courage is, is acting in spite of being afraid, overcoming our fear. Whereas fearlessness would be to really to really transcend our fear, for it to arise in a way that really doesn't shake us, may still be there to some degree, but it's no longer it's no longer in the driver's seat. To read a little bit from an issue of Mountain Record. This is the Zen Mountain Monastery Journal, in which they a commentary on a case called the Stone Lion by the late John Daidalure is given, and can't look at the whole thing, but this is from Koans of the Way of Reality, which is a collection that Daidoshi himself put together, and each one wrote a prologue and a verse, and I'd like to read a little bit from his commentary on the prologue. And the prologue goes like this. Confined in a cage, up against a wall, pressed against barriers, if you linger in thought, holding back your potential, you will remain mired in fear and frozen in inaction. If, on the other hand, you advance fearlessly and without hesitation, you manifest your power as a competent adept of the way. Passing through entanglements and barriers, without hindrance, the time and season of great peace is attained. How do you advance fearlessly and without hesitation? That's the million-dollar question, and the question really that no one can answer for us. We have to answer it for ourselves. But here's what he says. Fear is one of the central themes we work with in our practice. When we examine fear, we find it is almost always based in the past, in something we have carried around for many years. It is part of the baggage we call ourself. Through the processes of Zen, through studying the self, that baggage becomes quite evident and accessible. Then he quotes the first part of the prologue I just read. Confined in a cage, up against the wall, pressed against barriers, if you linger in thought, holding back your potential, you will remain mired in fear and frozen in action. And a little bit later he says, although each of us has the potential of Buddhahood, as soon as we start analysing, we give rise not to freedom but to more things to analyse, more things to understand. As the inaction continues, the fear persists. We come up with all kinds of wonderful explanations for our fear, but somehow they don't seem to help. We define it, categorise it, analyse it, judge it, understand it. Still it persists. What is this fear? And he gives a dictionary definition. An agitation or dismay in anticipation of danger or harm. Anticipation. He says fear always has to do with what is going to happen next. It is always about the next corner, next day, next hour, next moment. It's a kind of a what if, where we throw up in front of us some image of what might happen. And we could relate this back to the question that the editors of The Hidden Lamp ask: what role does imagination play in our lives, in our practice? What if we see that what we throw up before us is an image? When we can do that, then the dust that's obscuring our minds becomes no dust. If, on the other hand, you advance fearlessly and without hesitation, you manifest your power as a competent adept of the way. What is this power? Power is ki. Ki is uncovered in the process of zazen. Just the simple action of acknowledging a thought and letting it go and bringing your attention back to the breath builds power. Little by little, day by day, the practice of sitting, of watching the flow of thoughts without analysing, judging or understanding them, builds confidence almost imperceptibly. Passing through entanglements and barriers without hindrance, the time and season of great peace is attained. The season of great peace is what we call the endless spring. The endless spring is always present, just as spring is always present. In the frozen branches buried beneath 3 feet of snow, spring is present. Buried deep beneath years of the conditioning lives a Buddha. But unless we realize and activate that potential, it remains dormant and doesn't impart any strength to our lives or to anyone else. Our practice really is just to have faith in that buried Buddha and to keep excavating, to keep working at uncovering it. She goes on to point out that sometimes being fearless is stupid. There are good reasons to be afraid. We would do well to be more afraid of what we humans are doing to our biosphere, to not be afraid about that was to be in denial, to think that we're somehow invulnerable. He says there is also the fearlessness of the young who still see themselves as invulnerable. That sense of invulnerability and willingness to take chances is what the military loves about young people. They take that young energy and use it for their own purposes. On the other hand, the kind of fearlessness I'm speaking of is a generous, compassionate fearlessness. It is not a matter of just exerting one's power. I'm speaking of spiritual fearlessness, one of the attributes of a spiritual warrior. To see this kind of fearlessness throughout history manifested by all of the great teachers, Moses, Jesus, Saint Teresa, Buddha, Bodhidharma, because their fearlessness was not self-centered, it was compassionate. That is why I stress repeatedly to be generous with your practice and with your zazen. Don't just practice for yourself, but for all sentient beings. Give your zazen to someone who needs it. It makes a huge difference when we practice in that spirit, to practice zazen generously, to offer it up, it can help shift us from obsession with what we have and haven't attained, and move to a spirit of generosity, of giving. It's a profoundly liberating shift. It's one that even as we open more to people's suffering, we find there's also more joy, more energy, more resilience. And more fearlessness. Fearlessness like a mother has when her child is in danger. One of the first encouragement talks I ever heard, and probably the first session I went to in Rochester, was the story of a mother who was in a car accident, and her child was pinned under the vehicle. She was thrown out of the vehicle, but her child was pinned underneath it, and she managed to lift the car enough so that somebody could pull her child out, something that would have been totally impossible for her to do normally. But somehow she managed to summon that energy, that key, by putting herself 100% into that effort. Everything really comes down to making this 100% effort. And it's not like we can go to what we think 100% effort should be like. But rather, we just make the best effort we can in any given moment, even if it sounds or feels paltry, inadequate. Well, that's okay. It's the best we could do in this moment. And right then, right after, we get another moment. And then another one. And then another one. Dada also talks about how if we can acknowledge our fear, if we can really face it, then we can also get a greater sense of empowerment. Because it's our running from our fear which is really the problem, not so much the fear itself. And if we go through it enough times, that we'll experience being in fear, but then coming through, things not turning out as we had thought, perhaps, or our managing to endure a difficulty. He gives the example of canoeing, where you've turned upside down a few times in your canoe, but you make it down the river that you're going down in your kayak, say. In other words, you get to know that you can actually be okay. You can come through the other side. Really, this is learning to fall down. learning that you can feel full of anxiety